Well, hello and greetings, listeners, throughout time and space. Continuing now with our complete reading of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice by James Branch Cabell. And here be Chapter 10, Pitiful Disguises of Thragnar. Next, the tale tells that as Jurgen and the princess were nearing Gihon, a man came riding toward them, full armed in black, and having a red serpent with an apple in its mouth painted upon his shield. "Sir Knight," says he, speaking hollowly from the closed helmet, "you must yield to me that lady." "I think," says Jurgen civilly, "that you are mistaken." So they fought, and presently, since Caliburn was a resistless weapon, and he who wore the scabbard of Caliburn could not be wounded, Jurgen prevailed, and gave the strange knight so heavy a buffet that the knight fell senseless. "Do you think," says Jurgen, about to unlace his antagonist's helmet, "that this is Thragnar?" "There is no possible way of telling," replied Dame Guinevere. "If it is the Troll King, he should have offered you gifts, and when you contradicted him, he should have admitted you were right. Instead, he proffered nothing, and to contradiction he answered nothing, so that proves nothing. But silence is a proverbial form of assent. At all events, we will have to look at him." "But that too will prove nothing. Since Thragnar goes about his mischiefs so disguised by enchantments as invariably to resemble somebody else, and not himself at all. Such dishonest habits introduce an element of uncertainty, I grant you," says Jurgen. "Still, one can rarely err by keeping on the safe side. This person is, in any event, a very ill-bred fellow, with probably immoral intentions. Yes, caution is the main thing, and in justice to ourselves, we will keep on the safe side." So, without unloosening the helmet, he struck off the strange knight's head and left him thus. The princess was now mounted on the horse of their deceased assailant. "Assuredly," says Jurgen then, "a magic sword is a fine thing, and a very necessary equipment, too, for a knight-errant of my age. But you talk as though you were an old man, Monsieur de Logres." "Come now," thinks Jurgen, "this is a princess of rare discrimination. What, after all, is 40 and something when one is well preserved? This uncommonly intelligent girl reminds me a little of Marcove, whom I loved in Aretienne. Besides, she does not look at me as women look at an elderly man. I like this princess. In fact, I adore this princess. I wonder now, what would she say if I told her as much?" But Jurgen did not tempt chance that time, for just then they encountered a boy who had frizzed hair and painted cheeks. He walked mincingly in a curious garb of black, bespangled with gold lozenges, and he carried a gilded dung fork. Then Jurgen and the princess came to a black and silver pavilion standing by the roadside. At the door of the pavilion was an apple tree in blossom. From a branch of this tree was suspended a black hunting horn, silver mounted. A woman waited there alone. Before her was a chessboard, with the ebony and silver pieces set ready for a game, and upon the table to her left hand glittered flagons and goblets of silver. Eagerly this woman rose and came toward the travelers. "Oh, my dear Jurgen," says she, "but how fine you look in that new shirt you are wearing. But there was never a man had better taste in dress, as I have always said, and it is long I have waited for you in this pavilion, which belongs to a black gentleman who seems to be a great friend of yours. And he went into Crim Tartary this morning with some missionaries, by the worst piece of luck, for I know how sorry he will be to miss you, dear. Now, but I am forgetting that you must be very tired and thirsty, my darling, after your travels. So do you and the young lady have a sip of this, and then we will be telling one another of our adventures." For this woman had the appearance of Jurgen's wife, Dame Lisa, and of none other. Jurgen regarded her with two minds. "You certainly seem to be Lisa, but it is a long while since I saw Lisa in such an amiable mood. You must know," says she, still smiling, "that I have learned to appreciate you since we were separated. The fiend who stole you from me may possibly have brought about that wonder. Nonetheless, you have met me riding at adventure with a young woman, and you have assaulted neither of us. You have not even raised your voice. No, quite decidedly, here is a miracle beyond the power of any fiend." "Ah, but I have been doing a great deal of thinking, Jurgen, dear, as to our difficulties in the past, and it seems to me that you were almost always in the right." Guinevere nudged Jurgen. Do you note that? This is certainly Thrangnar in disguise." "I am beginning to think at all events it is not Lisa." Then Jurgen magisterially cleared his throat. "Lisa, if you indeed be Lisa, you must understand I am through with you. The plain truth is that you tire me. You talk and talk. No woman breathing equals you at mere volume and continuity of speech, but you say nothing that I have not heard 780 times, if not oftener." "You are perfectly right, my dear," says Dame Lisa, piteously. "But then, I never pretended to be as clever as you." "Spare me your beguilements, if you please, and besides, I am in love with this princess. Now spare me your recriminations also, for you have no real right to complain. If you had stayed the person whom I promised the priest to love, I would have continued to think the world of you. But you did nothing of the sort. From a cuddlesome and merry girl who thought whatever I did was done to perfection, you elected to develop into an uncommonly plain and short-tempered old woman." And Jurgen paused. Said he, "and did you not do this?" "Dame," Lisa answered sadly, "my dear, you are perfectly right from your way of thinking. However, I could not very well help getting older. But, oh, dear me," says Jurgen, "this is astonishingly inadequate impersonation, as any married man would see at once. Well, I made no contract to love any such plain and short-tempered person. I repudiate the claims of any such person as manifestly unfair. And I pledge undying affection to this high and noble princess, Guinevere, whom is the fairest lady that I have ever seen." "You are right," wailed Dame Lisa, "and I was entirely to blame. It was because I loved you, and wanted you to get on in the world and be a credit to my father's line of business that I nagged you so. But you will never understand the feelings of a wife, nor will you understand that even now I desire your happiness above all else. Here is our wedding ring, then, Jurgen. I give you back your freedom, and I pray that this princess may make you very happy, my dear, for surely you deserve a princess if ever any man did. Jurgen shook his head. It is astounding that a demon so much talked about should be so poor an impersonator. It raises the staggering supposition that the majority of married women must go to heaven. As for your ring, I am not accepting gifts this morning from anyone. But you understand, I trust, that I am hopelessly enamored of the princess on account of her beauty. Oh, and I cannot blame you, my dear. She is the loveliest person I have ever seen. Ha, Thragnar, says Jurgen. I have you now. A woman might just possibly have granted her own homeliness, but no woman that ever breathed would have conceded the princess had a ray of good looks. So with Caliburn he smote and struck off the head of the thing which foolishly pretending to be Dame Lisa. Well done, oh, bravely done, cried Guinevere. Now the enchantment is dissolved, and Thragnar is slain by my clever champion. I could wish there were some sure sign of that, said Jurgen. I would have preferred that the pavilion and the decapitated troll king had vanished with a peal of thunder and an earthquake and such other phenomena as are customary. Instead, nothing has changed, except that the woman who was talking to me a moment since now lies at my feet in a very untidy condition. You conceive, madam, I used to tease her about the twisted little finger in the days before we began to squabble, and it annoys me that Thragnar should not have omitted even Lisa's crooked little finger on her left hand. Yes, such painstaking carefulness worries me. For you conceive, also, madam, it would be more or less awkward if I had made an error, and if the appearance were in reality what it seemed to be, because I was pretty trying sometimes. At all events, I have done that which seemed equitable, and I have found no comfort in the doing of it, and I do not like this place. Chapter 11. Appearance of the Duke of Logres. So Jurgen brushed from the table the chessmen that were set there in readiness for a game, and he emptied the silver flagons upon the ground. His reasons for not meddling with the horn he explained to the princess. She shivered and said that, such being the case, he was certainly very sensible. Then they mounted and departed from the black and silver pavilion. They came thus without further adventure to Gogranguar's city of Camelard. Now there was shouting, and the bells all rang when the people knew their princess was returned to them. The houses were hung with painted cloths and banners, and trumpets sounded as Guinevere and Jurgen came to the king in his hall of judgment. And thus Gorgran, that was king of Galthion, and lord of Ensengarth, and Camway, and Sargal, came down from his wide throne, and he embraced first Guinevere, and then Jurgen. And demand of me what you will, Duke of Logres, said Gorgvan, when he had heard the champion's name, and it is yours for the asking, for you have restored to me the best-loved daughter that ever was the pride of a high king. Sir, replied Jurgen reasonably, A service rendered so gladly should be its own reward. So I am asking that you do in turn restore to me the Princess Guinevere in honorable marriage. Do you understand? Because I am a poor, lorn widower. I am tolerably certain, but I am quite certain I love your daughter with my whole heart. Thus Jurgen, whose periods were confused by emotion, I do not see what the condition of your heart has to do with any such unreasonable request, and you have no good sense to be asking this thing of me, when here are the servants of Arthur, that is new king of the Britons, come to ask for my daughter as his wife. That, you see, Duke of Logres, you tell me, and I concede a duke is all very well, but I expect you in return to concede a king takes precedence with any man whose daughter is marriageable. But tomorrow or the next day, it may be, you and I will talk over your reward more privately. Meanwhile, it is very queer and very frightened you are looking to be the champion who conquered Thragnar. For Jurgen was staring at the great mirror behind the king's throne. In this mirror Jurgen saw the back of Gorgon's crowned head, and beyond this Jurgen saw a queer and frightened-looking young fellow with sleek black hair and an impudent nose, and wide-open, bright brown eyes, which were staring hard at Jurgen. And the lad's very red and very heavy lips were parted so that you saw what fine, strong teeth he had, and he wore a glittering shirt with curious figures on it. I was thinking, says Jurgen, and he saw the lad in the mirror was speaking too. I was thinking that it is a remarkable mirror you have here. It is like any other mirror, replies the king, and that it shows things as they are. But if you fancy it as your reward, why take it and welcome. And are you still talking of rewards? Cries Jurgen. Well, if that mirror shows things as they are, I have come out of my borrowed Wednesday, still 21. Oh, but it was the clever fellow I was, to flatter Mother Sarita so cunningly, and to fool her into such generosity. And I wonder that you, who are only a king, with blessed eyes under your crown, and with a drooping belly under all your royal robes, should be talking of rewarding a fine young fellow of 21, for there is nothing you have which I need be wanting now. Then you will not be plaguing me any more with your nonsense about my daughters, and that is excellent news. But I have no requirement to be asking your good graces now, said Jurgen, nor the goodwill of any man alive that has a handsome daughter or a handsome wife. For now I have the aid of a lad that was very recently made Duke of Logres, and with his countenance I can look out for myself, and I can get justice done me everywhere, in all the bedchambers of the world. And Jurgen snapped his fingers and was about to turn away from the king. There was much sunlight in the hall, so that Jurgen in this half-turn confronted his shadow as it lay plain upon the flagstones, and Jurgen looked at it very intently. Of course, said Jurgen presently, I only meant in a manner of speaking, sir, and was paraphrasing the splendid, if hackneyed passage from Sornatius, with which you are doubtless familiar, in which he goes on to say, so much more beautifully than I could possibly express without quoting him word for word, that all this was spoken jestingly, and without the least intention of offending anybody, anybody whatever, I can assure you, sir. Very well, said Gorgon, and he smiled for no reason that was apparent to Jurgen, who was still watching his shadow sideways. Tomorrow, I repeat, I must talk with you more privately. Today I am giving a banquet such as was never known in these parts, because my daughter is restored to me, and because my daughter is going to be queen over all the Britons. So said Gorgran, that was king of Glathion, and lord of Ensgarth, and Camwai, and Sargal. And this was done. And everywhere at the banquet Jurgen heard talk of this King Arthur, who was to marry Dame Guinevere, and of the prophecy which Merlin Ambrosius had made as to the young monarch. For Merlin had predicted, he shall afford succor, and shall tread upon the necks of his enemies. The isles of the ocean shall be subdued by him, and he shall possess the forests of Gaul. The house of Romulus shall fear his rage, and his axe shall be food for the narrators. Why then, says Jurgen to himself, this monarch reminds me in all things of David of Israel, who was so splendid and famous and so greedy in the ancient ages. For to these forests and islands and necks and other possessions, this Arthur Pendragon must be adding my one ewe lamb, and I lack a Nathan to convert him to repentance. Now but this, to be sure, is a very unfair thing. Then Jurgen looked again into a mirror, and presently the eyes of the lad he found therein began to twinkle. Have at you, David, said Jurgen valorously, since after all I see no reason to despair. Chapter 12. Excursus of Yolande's Undoing. Now Jurgen, self-appointed Duke of Logres, abode at the court of King Gorgran. The month of May passed quickly and pleasantly, but the monstrous shadow which followed Jurgen did not pass. Still no one noticed it. That was the main thing. For himself, he was not afraid of shadows, and the queerness of this one was not enough to distract his thoughts from Guinevere, nor from his love-making with Guinevere. For there were quiet times in Glathion, now that the war with Rhys of Nothingalis was satisfactorily ended, and love-making was now everywhere in vogue. By way of diversion, gentlemen hunted and fished and rode a-hawking, and amicably slashed and battered one another in tournaments. But their really serious pursuit was love-making, after the manner of chivalrous persons, who knew that the king's trumpets would presently be summoning them into less softly furnished fields of action, from one or another of which they would return feet foremost on a bier. So Jurgen sighed and warbled and made eyes with many excellent fighting men, and the princes listened with many other ladies whose hearts were not of flint, and Gorgran meditated. Now it was the kingly custom of Gorgran, when his dinner was spread at noontide, not to go to meat until all such as demanded justice from him had been furnished with a champion to redress the wrong. One day, as the gaunt old king sat thus in his main hall, upon a seat of green rushes covered with yellow satin, and with a cushion of yellow satin under his elbow, and with his barons ranged about him according to their degrees, a damsel came with a very heart-rending tale of the oppression that was on her. Gorgran blinked at her and nodded. "You are the handsomest woman I have seen in a long while," says he, irrelevantly. "You are a woman I have waited for. Duke Jurgen of Lorgras will undertake this adventure. There being no help for it, Jurgen rode off with his dame Yolande, not very well pleased, but as they rode he jested with her. And so, with much laughter by the way, Yolande conducted him to the green castle, of which he had been dispossessed by Grand Magog, a most formidable giant. Formidable. Grey Magog, a most formidable giant. Now prepare to meet your death, Sir Knight, cried Grey Magog, laughing horribly and brandishing his club. For all knights who come hither I have sworn to slay. Well, if truth-telling were a sin, you would be a very virtuous giant, says Jurgen, and he flourished Thragnar's sword, resistless Caliburn. Then they fought, and Jurgen killed Grey Magog. Thus was the green castle restored to Dame Yolande, and the maidens who attended her aforetime were duly released from the cellarage. They were now maidens by courtesy only, but so tender is the heart of women that they all wept over Grey Magog. Yolande was very grateful and proffered every manner of reward. But no, I will take none of these fine jewels, nor money, nor lands either, says Jurgen. For Logrias, I must tell you, is a fairly well-to-do duchy, and the killing of giants is by way of being my favorite pastime. He is well paid that is well satisfied. Yet if you must reward me for such a little service, do you swear to do what you can to get me the love of my lady, and that will suffice. Yolande, without any particular enthusiasm, consented to attempt this, and indeed Yolande was, at Jurgen's request, made oath upon the 4 evangelists that she would do everything within her power to aid him. Very well, said Jurgen, you have sworn, and it is you whom I love. Surprise now made her lovely. Yolande was frankly delighted at the thought of marrying the young Duke of Logrias, and offered to send for a priest at once. My dear, says Jurgen, there is no need to bother a priest about our private affairs. She took his meaning and sighed. Now I regret, said she, that I made so solemn an oath. Your trick was unfair. Oh, not at all, said Jurgen, and presently you will not regret it, for indeed the game is well worth the candle. How is that shown, Monsieur de Logrias? Why, by candlelight, says Jurgen, naturally. In that event, we will talk no further of it until this evening. So that evening, Yolande sent for him. She was, as Gorgamon had said, a remarkably handsome woman, sleek and sumptuous, and crowned with a wealth of copper-colored hair. Tonight she was at her best in a tunic of shimmering blue, with a surcoat of gold embroidery and with gold embroidered pendant sleeves that touched the floor. Thus she was when Jurgen came to her. Now, says Yolande, frowning, you may as well come out straightforwardly with what you are hinting at this morning. But first Jurgen looked about the apartment, and it was lighted by a tall gilt stand whereupon burned candles. He counted these, and he whistled, 7 candles. Upon my word, sweetheart, you do me great honor, for this is a veritable illumination. To think of it now, that you should honor me as people do saints, with 7 candles. Well, I am only mortal, but nonetheless I am Jurgen, and I shall endeavor to repay this 7-fold courtesy without discount. Oh, Monsieur de Longray, cried Dame Yolande, but with what incomprehensible nonsense you talk. You misinterpret matters, for I can assure you I had nothing of that sort in mind. Besides, I do not know what you are talking about. Indeed, I must warn you that my actions often speak more unmistakably than my words. It is what learned persons term an idiosyncrasy. And I certainly do not see how any of the saints can be concerned in this. If you had said the four evangelists now, for we were talking of the four evangelists, you remember, this morning. Oh, but how stupid it is of you, Monsieur de Longray, to stand there grinning and looking at me in a way that makes me blush. Well, that is easily remedied, said Jurgen, as he blew out the candles, since women do not blush in the dark. What do you plan, Monsieur de Longray? Do not be alarmed, said Jurgen. I shall deal fairly with you. And in fact, Yolande confessed afterward that, considering everything, Monsieur de Longray's was very generous. Jurgen confessed nothing, and as the room was profoundly dark, nobody else can speak with authority as to what happened there. It suffices that the Duke of Longrays and the Lady of the Green Castle parted later on the most friendly terms. Just parted on the most friendly terms. You have undone me with your games and your candles and your scrupulous returning of courtesies, said Yolande, and yawned, for she was sleepy. But I fear that I do not hate you as much as I ought to. No woman ever does, says Jurgen, at this hour. He called for breakfast, then kissed Yolande. For this, as Jurgen had said, was their hour of parting, and he rode away from the Green Castle in high spirits. Why, what a thing it is again to be a fine young fellow, said Jurgen. Well, even though her big brown eyes protrude too much, something like a lobster's, she is a splendid woman, that Dame Yolande. And it is a comfort to reflect I have seen justice was done her. Then he rode back to Camillard, singing with delight, and the thought that he was riding toward the Princess Guinevere, whom he loved with his whole heart. That Jurgen is certainly a monstrously clever fellow. Come back. I will continue reading the book soon. The broadcasts are being archived on YouTube. Go there, search for Roarshock channel, and please subscribe. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be back.